Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Bonnie Garcia, statewide literacy co-director with the California Department of Education. And I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us on this for this important session in the California Literacy Webinar Series, where we focus today on a critical aspect of literacy, foundational skills. These skills are not just the building blocks of reading and writing, they are the gateway to future learning and long-term academic success. It all begins with best first instruction, high quality, evidence-based teaching, and extends to data-driven and strategically planned supplemental or intensified supports as needed. Our responsibility is to ensure that instruction and interventions are accessible, they're timely, targeted, and effective. By committing to best practices and equity-driven instruction, we make literacy a promise fulfilled for every student in California. We want to thank you for being a part of this movement to move the needle on student achievement and ensuring that our students are reading by third grade and beyond. Now, to officially open today's session and share the vision behind this work, it is my honor to introduce our Chief Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Ingrid Roberson.
Thank you for that, Dr. Garcia. Really excited to be here today to have this whole session on and a continuing session on our California Literacy Roadmap. And it really is about providing the best first instruction. We know that makes the biggest difference in students' lives, as well as having those interventions. And what we're seeing across districts is this focus on foundational literacy skills, TK through 5. So if you don't already know, we did make some modest gains this year. We saw 1.8% growth in our English language arts, as well as in mathematics at all the different grade levels. And so we want to continue on that. Moderate gains, but we know we can do more. We know our students deserve more. And so I'm very excited for what both our state literacy directors, Dr. Garcia and Nancy Brunelson, have in store for you. You'll get a chance to hear about the policy context and California's approach to both literacy and biliteracy. We'll have an overview of the California Literacy Roadmap, really diving in with some experts here on those foundational literacy skills and how MTSS tools can be supportive. We'll also take a look at some online courses, and we're going to have a panel discussion. So they've planned a really rich 90 minutes for you all. Again, we want to build on the growth that we've seen here in the great state of California. We really want to be in our values, and we value both literacy, and that includes the science of reading, the science of literacy. We are hearing that from districts that made above average gains this year, just the role that the science of reading has played. But also in California, given who we are, we value both literacy and biliteracy. There's just such an incredible opportunity for our students to walk away with literacy in more than one language. So we're really glad that you are here. And again, we've got a whole rich 90 minutes together just to deepen our understanding and to apply it in the next day in the classroom. So with that, I will turn it over to co-director Nancy Brunelson.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roberson. And I believe that Bonnie Garcia is going to share the agenda with our audience today. So I will turn it back to Bonnie for just a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Nancy. Is there a next slide?
Yes, there is.
Or with the agenda, I'm sorry.
There you go.
There we go. Thank you. So today, as was shared, as Dr. Roberson mentioned, we'll be doing welcome introductions as we are now talking about the objectives. And we've heard from Dr. Roberson, and we're going to move into policy context, an overview of our literacy roadmap and the recently released content blocks. And we're excited about 6 through 12 coming out and multilingual coming out in the spring. but I'm getting ahead of myself. We will today focus on foundational literacy skills, both in best first instruction and intervention, really thinking through MTSS and what are some resources that we currently have available to support our intervention practices. We will then move into an exciting panel discussion with some wonderful experts and leaders in the field, which Nancy will go over in just a second before we close out. And we do anticipate having some time for Q&A. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nancy to go over the next part of our agenda.
Thank you, Bonnie. Our objectives for the day are to become familiar with the historical and current developments in literacy policy related to foundational literacy skills in California, to understand the key elements of the literacy content blocks for transitional kindergarten through grade 5 for the foundational literacy skills, understand intervention as a part of a multi-tiered system of support, and become familiar with supporting research and available resources and professional learning opportunities. I will just back up for a moment to show you the wonderful presenters who will be with us today. You've heard from Dr. Hallie Yop-Slowick before, who is Professor Emeritus of California State University, Fullerton, and also the former co-director of the Center for the Advancement of Reading and Writing for the California State University, and writer of the ELA-ELD framework, along with a couple of others of us. Dr. Molly McCabe from Riverside County Office of Education is an administrator there with responsibilities for literacy and professional learning, and has done exciting work with the Curricular Improvement and Support Committee for the California Superintendents and California County Superintendents. And then Julie Dooley from Contra Costa County Office of Education, director and responsible for Project Arise, as well as many other duties related to projects and English language arts in the Contra Costa County Office of Education. And we're so pleased to have these experts and leaders from county offices, and you'll be hearing more from each of them in just a bit. You have resources available to you, and there is a handout that we'll be putting a link to in the chat so that you have access to all the materials that are going to be shared. But just as a little preview, our featured resources will be the literacy roadmap, the literacy content blocks for TK5 English medium classrooms, and the Reading Difficulties Risk Screener Toolkit addendum produced by the California County Superintendent's Committee, Curriculum Improvement and Support, and then materials from Project Arise, which is a professional learning set of opportunities, and we'll be hearing from Julie Dooley about those. Also, we will share with you a handout from a webinar we did a couple of years ago when we first started, that includes a number of very specific resources from the framework on foundational skills. So we have heard from Ingrid, and so now I will spend a couple of minutes on the policy context and overview of the literacy roadmap and the content blocks. Everything we're going to present today builds on these seminal documents. These are not new to you. It's our standards, California Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts and Literacy for K through grade 12, the California English Language Development Standards, also K-12, and the preschool transitional kindergarten learning foundations, specifically for language and literacy development. And those address preschool and transitional kindergarten. So these are the expectations for learning across all of our grades that are really explicated in the framework that we published several years ago, the ELA ELD framework for California public schools, which includes, some people don't realize that we address TK within that framework all the way up through grade 12. And then another important document is the resource guide to foundational skills that really takes all of the guidance about teaching foundational skills from the various chapters in the framework and puts it together in one location. And so that is on the handout for you and in the links. In addition to those documents, our policies are also influenced by and guided by the California English Learner Roadmap, the California Dyslexia Guidelines, the Digital Learning Integration and Standards Guidance document, and very recently published the P3 Progressions, or preschool through third grade progressions for language and literacy development. And finally, the literacy content blocks for English medium classrooms in TK through 5. Let me share a bit about those. Before I get to the content blocks, jumping ahead of myself, I want to reiterate that our stance on foundational skills builds on what we have in the framework and has been further specified, further delineated within the documents that have been published since. So that resource guide and some of the other documents you see here. Recently, we published a statement of California's approach to literacy and biliteracy, and I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes on that to share with you what this statement says. And you'll find that right at the beginning of our California Literacy webpage. But it's a two-paragraph statement that our approach to literacy and biliteracy builds on decades of research applicable to our culturally and linguistically rich and diverse student population, including the science of reading and literacy and the science of learning and development. Our intentional approach to literacy promotes carefully sequenced initial instruction, appropriate practice and reinforcement, intervention is necessary, and meaningful application in ELA, ELD, and literacy in all content areas. It values equally the development of knowledge and skills in each area of the language arts and their use across disciplines, including world languages, based on students' identified assets and assessed needs. The approach recognizes the critical importance of ensuring that all students have access to joyful, motivating, linguistically and culturally affirming, and developmentally appropriate literacy experiences that lead to strong content knowledge and effective communication skills. Our approach to literacy and biliteracy promotes evidence-based instruction that teaches the foundational skills, as you all know, along with oral language development, vocabulary, comprehension, writing, speaking, and listening skills. Integrated and designated English language development instruction are incorporated for identified English learner students, and opportunities for the development of biliteracy are provided for all. And lastly, students with reading difficulties and students with exceptional needs receive supplemental and intensified academic supports to maximize their learning. The learning progress and literacy outcomes for all students are carefully monitored and prioritized within a system, capitalized for emphasis, of instruction, curriculum, and assessment that is coherent and effective. I think you'll agree that this is a densely packed set of paragraphs, but we will be reflecting several of these concepts within the presentation today. You'll find that once again on the California Literacy webpage, right on the CDE homepage on our website. So turning to the roadmap now, we have been working on this since it was authorized in 2023 and released the literacy content blocks for English medium classrooms TK through 5 in May. And you'll see the website once again. Again, there should be in the chat some links for you to access all of these materials. And as Bonnie indicated, we're looking forward to publishing literacy content blocks for grades 6 through 12 this spring, and a separate set of multilingual literacy guidance, not exactly content blocks, but that will address the range from TK through 12. And so those are all important pieces of our literacy roadmap. Looking at the content blocks, let me just spend a minute or so looking at how they're organized. You see there we have grade levels or grade spans, TK, K, 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5. There is an overview and basic principles of instruction within each of these grades or grade spans, and then we address 4 areas of literacy and language instruction. How are these 4 areas organized? Language starts us off and is one big, very critical, important area. Within the foundational literacy skills that Dr. Yop will be talking more about momentarily, we address print concepts, phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics and word recognition, and reading fluency. Then integrated reading and writing, with reading engaging with text and writing. And comprehensive ELD, which includes and is required for all identified English learner students, integrated ELD and designated ELD. How is each of these literacy areas organized, or sub-areas? So here's just an excerpt from the document. There's a definition that is usually in italics, and a recommended duration. How many minutes a day are we suggesting that this take place? Then it continues on, and in this case, this is the sub-area of phonics and word recognition with a definition, if appropriate, or if applicable for that sub-area, and then evidence-based practices. So this is not the entire list, but it's just an excerpt so that you can see how it's formatted. Key content that should be taught in each area. It's not everything that you'll teach or that will be taught, and with accompanying instructional routines or strategies. How is it that we're thinking that these could be used? Well, they're really an opportunity for professionals to reacquaint themselves with the framework. In some sense, it's a framework in miniature. Individual reflections, individual and team planning, discussions of expectations, materials, approaches, assessments, and interventions, so decision-making around all that. They could be used to plan professional learning and coaching, both individually and between a coach and a teacher and as teams. Development of literacy plans at the site and at the district, and making decisions about curricula, instructional materials, and assessment. With that very broad overview of the literacy content blocks, I will now turn you over to Dr. Hallie Yap, who will talk more about foundational literacy skills.
Thank you,
And
Nancy.
so much.
Thank you, Nancy. And thanks for having me here. And good afternoon. Thanks to all of you for being here. I have to say, as a former kindergarten and first grade teacher in a bilingual setting, and as a former reading specialist who supported upper elementary students, I'm happy to be here and to participate in the important work that's been going on in this state. I'm going to share with you here just some of the a few of the fundamental ideas regarding foundational skills. And ideally, much of this will be familiar to you, but maybe hearing it again in a slightly different way and seeing how it builds into supplemental and intensified instruction will be helpful. Let's just start again with a few of the fundamental ideas regarding the foundational skills. Acquisition of the foundational skills is crucial. There's no doubt about it. And I can't imagine anyone who disagrees. Children need to acquire the foundational skills. The purpose of acquisition is to enable rich, meaningful engagement as readers and writers with print. And key here is that this must be obvious to learners. This is why we are learning these. It's not because it was written somewhere and teachers have to go through it, but because there's an actual purpose that benefits me as the learner, that excites me as the learner. And finally, given the importance and the far-reaching, wide-ranging impact of literacy developments on lives, instruction should be thoughtfully sequenced and implemented. What is the best instruction we can provide? The good news is that research has much to offer in this regard, and it has influenced California's work in all those efforts that Nancy just mentioned. On this next slide, I share the ultimate goals. See if I can get that to move. Here we go. The ultimate goals of foundational skills instruction. Simply, these are that students rapidly recognize and decode printed words in meaningful context, that they can access printed language with little hesitation. As a TK, a grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grade teacher, I'm helping students move along towards that goal and toward a second goal, that students can nearly effortlessly use their knowledge of the symbol system to record ideas, wishes, information, opinions, their stories, that they can record those things in print. In other words, the acquisition of foundational skills contributes to students' ability to independently engage with and use printed language as readers and writers for their own purposes. And let me repeat that. For their own purposes. Knowing how to use the code is empowering. It can and it should be motivating, exciting, positive, and fun for kids and, frankly, for the teacher. Let's make it a successful endeavor for all students. We hope that the literacy content blocks in the literacy roadmap will be helpful in your important work. I'm going to share some of what you'll see, or maybe have already seen when you examine those literacy blocks. So let's start here. This says best first instruction content. The content blocks integrate content and instructional practices. Both comprise best first instruction. What are we teaching and how are we teaching it? In terms of the foundational skills content, and keep in mind, this is only one area of the literacy block. The others Nancy mentioned, language, integrated reading and writing, and comprehensive ELD. This one, the foundational skills content for TK5 centers on the following, which again, you've already seen, and as you've interacted with the standards, the ELA standards and the ELD standards, you're aware of these. Print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency. These are the clusters of foundational skills because there are different concepts within each of those. These are the clusters of foundational skills of reading as presented in the California standards for ELA and literacy. The first three bullets also appear in the preschool, transitional, kindergarten learning foundations, although they're phrased and organized slightly differently. We could talk about that later if you would like to ask a question on that at the end. Because printing and spelling are intimately tied to these skills at all phases, TK and beyond, they are mutually supportive. Guidance regarding their instruction is included in the foundational skills area of each content block. We broadened the heading, therefore, in this area to foundational literacy skills. The standards in K through 5 are the foundational skills in reading. Ideally, wonderfully, I should say, the PTKLF refers to them as foundational literacy skills. We've also broadened that here in our literacy content blocks to represent the fact that it is beyond just those 4 categories, that we are incorporating other areas, and you see those bulleted below the dashed line on the slide. The specific content, grade by grade, reflects what the goals are in that grade level. In kindergarten, we may support children recognizing their names in print. And in grades 5 and 6, we'll be working on teaching children how to decode multisyllabic words and capitalize on Greek and Latin roots. There is a progression, a building of content. Importantly, you see encircled here, I want to highlight that language and meaning making must undergird everything we do in literacy. They are the core, they are critical, they are fundamental to any literacy learning, and so are woven into each area of the grade level content, literacy content blocks. I also want to note, and you'll see this on the right side of your screen, that the PTKLF, preschool, transitional, kindergarten learning foundations, and the P3 progressions, the ELA ELD framework with TK through 5, and the ELA literacy standards and the ELD standards informed our work on these blocks. Here we have the content literacy block, best first instruction, practices. I just shared with you on the previous slide the content. What's the content? And it's those clusters of foundational skills, plus adding in printing and spelling, plus recognizing how meaning making and language undergird everything. This slide heightens our attention to the practices, right? How do we teach it? The practices. This slide happens to share the practices that are drawn from grade 1, but most of these are the same throughout the grades. We start with basic principles in all of the foundational skills areas, and here they are. The basic principles is that instruction will be direct, explicit, systematic, sequential. I'll share with you shortly how TK and K are different from that. That it is multimodal. In other words, kids see, kids hear, kids touch, kids move, kids manipulate as they are learning. It involves active engagement, opportunities for practice, for exploring, for interacting. It capitalizes on children's strengths, interests, cultures, languages, ways of expressing. It is motivating, empowering. It involves choice, connection with interests and lives. It integrates ELD throughout, and it includes scaffolding, supports, accommodations, modifications as needed. In TK and K, we highlight the first bullet is changed to read this way: intentionally and sequentially plan and provide learning experiences, including explicit instruction and guided and play-based activities that address specific objectives and are developmentally appropriate. You can find that on one of the links that Bonnie shared with you. If you go to the kindergarten and kindergarten literacy content blocks, you'll see those listed, that listed in the basic principles of instruction, and you'll see this listed under the basic principles of instruction, that we establish caring relationships and everyday routines and interactions to create a safe, joyful environment for learning. So next slide. So here we have we aim to make progress in these areas by the end of grade 1. Print concepts and phonological awareness, they're in our standards for TK, or foundations for TK, standards for grades K and 1. And our hope is that kids will have made major progress in both of these areas by the end of grade 1. Some of the ideas that we bring forth in the evidence-based practices for grade 1 in terms of print concepts are that kiddos will learn the features and purposes of print. That gets back to one of those goals of literacy instruction, of foundational skills instruction. They understand why they're learning this, what role they have to play in their lives. So this is where we provide a print-rich environment, where we have lots of print around the room, lots of books. We read aloud big books. We write with children daily to model the use of purpose of print. These are elucidated not only in the framework, but also in the literacy content blocks, that alphabet knowledge is a crucial skill that needs to be learned. We recognize and name letters. We started teaching in TK and earlier even, printing skills. Children are beginning to work on some of their letters, especially those related to their names. But as by the time we're in kindergarten, printing skills become something that we give considerable attention to, because the more comfortable kids are with printing, the more they can write down their own thoughts. The more that we blend printing with the name of a letter and the sounds of that letter, the richer that understanding. That becomes part of the multimodal approach to supporting kids' development of this knowledge and these skills. That it involves practice and exploration, finding and using letters and using print. That it, in terms of writing systems, that we recognize that children are multilingual learners, have maybe using a different writing system than English. And this is an English medium class. So what am I doing to make sure that I can explicitly help kids see the differences between the languages of their native language and the writing system of English? And that might include direction of print, the use of symbols, the use of punctuation, and ultimately it will involve other things through the grades. I'm focused here on grade 1. Phonological awareness is the other crucial skill that we hope children will acquire. We don't hope, we work toward it. We make it a serious goal as we work toward supporting children, specifically in oral blending and segmenting of phonemes. And there are lots of activities we can do with that, and instructional programs lay out a progression for that. We also, though, offer playful opportunities to notice and manipulate sounds. Yes, we have print-rich environments. We also have phonologically rich environments, that if phonemic awareness doesn't just occur during this 15-minute section of the day, but I am reading books that play with sounds. I am singing songs that play with sounds. I am sharing poetry that is goofy and plays with sounds. And I'm pointing that out to heighten children's awareness. It's part of this phonologically rich environment. And there's the explicit instruction that supports kids in hearing, attending to, understanding, and specifically orally blending and segmenting phonemes. That multimodal strategies again come into play. We might be moving chips, as in Elkonin boxes, when we're segmenting the word dog, and we move a chip to represent another to move to represent another to represent. We may look at our mouths in a mirror to see how we are forming different sounds with our mouths. And again, with children who are multilingual, who have different primary languages than English, we will emphasize cross-linguistic transfer. What sounds exist in both English and that primary language, and what sounds are unique to each of those languages? In the phonics and word recognition sub area of the foundational skills in the literacy content block, I'm sharing a number of things on this slide, and I'll just highlight a few things. I do need to share what's here in writing, that it's direct, it's systematic, it's explicit, it's sequential. Students aren't learning this by accident. just because they stumbled across it one day. There is a deliberate plan. It is systematically laid out, and it is sequential and explicit. And it's multimodal, again, using different modes of learning and very active strategies. So children aren't just sitting there filling out sheets of paper, listening to a teacher lecture, but they're actively engaged in the learning and in the understanding and in the manipulations. There's a progression, as when I say it's sequential, part of that progression is going from sound symbols understandings to single reading, decoding, single syllable words, multisyllabic words, and incorporated, not distinctly separate, although we will highlight that and pull it out at times, but we always connect it back with phonemic awareness and with printing, and that we apply any knowledge that we are gaining about the code to both decoding, I'm reading it, and encoding, I'm using what I know to write things down. I may listen for sounds and map them to print, and vice versa. Daily writing, that is a theme that is going to run through, that is running through, that you will notice, to all sections of the literacy content block. Children need to write more. Writing is very empowering. Writing allows us to apply our skills. Writing gives us a reason to learn those skills. And we write about things we care about and that we are studying and so forth. We get opportunities to practice. We do word sorts. We do word building activities. And critically, we ensure understanding. We want to make sure that kids understand the words they're being asked to decode. That is crucial for our students who are identified as English learners. It's crucial for all students, that we're not just randomly using words for the sake of practicing those sounds, but that those words then carry meaning. We teach high frequency words so that kids very quickly start having access to other print. And once again, that notion of cross-linguistic transfer. When we think about sound symbol correspondences, which sounds and the corresponding letter exist in English, and do they exist in the primary language of the children? And are there some that exist in the primary language of the children that don't exist in English? And the final area is the key content and practices related to fluency. And again, fluency reflects freedom from word identification difficulties that might hinder comprehension. Daily opportunities to practice. Reading volume contributes to not only the acquisition of foundational skills, such as accuracy, reading with expression, and so forth, but it also expands language, it expands world knowledge, empathy for others, and it fosters a love for print, for books, for stories, for information. So reading volume, daily activities enhances our fluency, which gives us more opportunity to engage in meaning making, but it also expands our worlds and our language. That we foster motivation is reading volume for reading volume's sake is not going to happen unless kids are also interested in reading. If they're motivated, are we drawing on their interests? Are we providing them choice of reading materials? That starts way back when we first get children into our system. And it should continue throughout the years. And you will see, if you look at this, the literacy content blocks, this whole notion of motivation and choice and meaning making is very present. We share linguistically, and related to that is the sharing of linguistically and culturally relevant and authentic texts that we we model by reading aloud a lot. And yes, we read aloud all through the grades, but we don't just take over children's reading. They read too, students read too. Even in high school, I'm reading aloud some excerpts for my students to listen to what fluent reading, expressive reading sounds like. We engage students in repeated reading for authentic reasons, not just, oh, you have to read it again 3 times, but no, we're rehearsing for some choral reading presentation. We're rehearsing because we're sharing poetry. We're reading aloud our own work to our peers. Those are our authentic reasons for doing that. And again, we ensure accurate word identification to support that nearly effortless application so attention can be devoted to meaning. I want to just highlight a couple things about multilingual learners, even though I've said something about ensuring attention to our multilingual learners, their language system, their printed system, meaning, ensuring that meaning is occurring. There are some things that I'll share with you related to that, and much more in the multilingual work that's coming up that will be shared ultimately with in the spring, I hear. It's also in the framework. It's also in a variety of other, Nancy mentioned a lot of sources in which some of this is discussed, but it builds on it. There's not just a one size fits all for multilingual learners. Obviously, what we do with foundational skills and any literacy instruction depends on the previous literacy experiences in the primary language, depends on oral proficiency in the primary language and in English. It depends on how closely the student's primary language is related to English in terms of the writing system as well as the sound system. And do we move through print left to right or right to left, top to bottom, bottom up? But here are some 3 things that I'm just calling out. We build on skills and knowledge in the first language. We absolutely capitalize on, we leverage all the linguistic skills that children come to our classrooms with, and we affirm what their home languages are and the knowledge they bring and the practices they bring and the experiences they've had. But a caution, we need to be sensitive to pronunciation differences due to dialects of English, due to regional accents, due to differences in primary language, because differences should not automatically suggest difficulties with decoding. We're not going to diagnose you as having difficulty with decoding if it's an artifact of speaking a different language at home, of speaking a different dialect, English dialect, and so forth. So we have to be very aware and cognizant of not leaping to certain conclusions about children. And finally, we need to, and this is a big one, ensure attention to meaning making. So one last slide here. The achievement of the foundational skills is crucial and must be a high priority in the TK through 5 years, but not an exclusive priority. You may recognize the circles of implementation that we have shared, for the last 10 years. It shows that foundational skills are just a part of the larger picture. This graphic also shows the context in which instruction should occur, and you've heard lots of this piece to it. This needs to be motivating, engaging, respectful, which means that values kids' experiences, values their background, values their cultures, values their language, values their responses to instruction, and intellectually challenging and integrated. So with that, we'll move back to Nancy and onward into what to do when best first instruction is not giving us all that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Hallie. That was just a wonderful overview. I would like to welcome now Dr. Molly McCabe from the Riverside County Office of Education, who will be sharing with us information related to multi-tiered system of supports. And as we all know, we are implementing the screening for risk of reading difficulties. And she's done some very good work with that and has some tools to offer you. Thank you, Molly.
Thank you so much, Nancy. So appreciate being here today and the opportunity to share some amazing resources that a group of us across the state have put together. So we were so excited when we saw the release of the content blocks and all the information in there and all the information that Hallie just shared with us, like really sharing with us what are those best practices and how can we ensure that every one of our students develops foundational skills, because as she said, these are foundational to literacy. And we really wanted to think about how we might use that information within the systems that we are creating within our schools and districts of support, and recognizing that every child that we work with and we are teaching potentially need different things. And so the content blocks have been so helpful and instrumental in helping us think about how we might ensure their learning, as well as the new screeners that are available to all of us. So just to kind of begin, as we looked at these resources that we have, we really wanted to think about what here can be used for all of our students. And the best intervention is actually prevention. It's what we're doing on a daily basis. As Hallie said, that high explicit systematic teaching, that high levels of student interaction, practice, and all of those things that she just shared with us, like really make a difference in ensuring that all of our students learn these foundational skills. But then also thinking about how we might use the data that we have to really target and decide how we might best support our students that might need a little bit more or some additional opportunities, time or opportunities. And then moving into even more for those that might need a little bit more of intensive support. So we have been working together as a state, and I have the incredible opportunity of representing a large group of people that all contributed to this. So it is not just mine, but we wanted to come up with the answer to the question of how can we use the screeners, the content blocks, the standards, the framework, and all of these things and put them together in one location so it was really, really easy for us as practitioners to use them as we're looking at data and thinking about how to best respond in whole group or small group with our students. So we created what is an addendum to what was previously published, which was called the Reading Difficulties Risk Screener Adoption Toolkit. And some of you may have seen that before, but at the very end of the document, there's a brand new page, and I'm going to highlight that information. So in this, we actually have created a document that really just describes what is MTSS or multi-tiered system support and what might that look like in our systems. But we wanted to give you resources to do that as well. So first of all, it starts with a definition. And then you'll see here, I just want to highlight a couple, that we have given you protocols or information on how to use that data, look at that data, kind of really dive into it. There's protocols, there's questions, there's resources, there's descriptions, there's definitions, and all of those types of things that are here for you. I'm not going to go through them all with you. There's a lot, but I want to invite you to dig into them and look at what might be helpful for you within your organization. But in addition to that, which is where I want to kind of highlight the work that we've been doing, is then there's also a resource, sorry, it's not moving, there we go, on how we might use the screener data to inform our instruction. And this response can be with all students. It could be in small group, but it could also be used for those students that need some additional time or support. And so I have kind of like copy and pasted some of it, so it's a little bit easier to read in the slide. So this is just a representation of it. But basically the purpose of this document was just to make sure that we all know what it means, like what is that skill? So very similar to what Hallie was just sharing with us. It connects us with the grade level standards that we are teaching in that grade. It gives us questions for us to consider during collaboration and when we have time to review the data, like just some reflective questions for us to consider. And then it pulls directly from those evidence-based practices that Hallie just shared that are in the literacy content block. And then we wanted to give people resources, like you might be reading through that and going, wow, that sounds great, but I want to know more about that. So that was really kind of what our goal was, really to integrate all of these amazing resources that have been provided to us at the state level. So this is what it looks like. It starts with an invitation, which is really kind of what I shared with you right now. It kind of defines what is tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And the role of data. The about this document is what I just shared, but it's been organized around the different components of the reading screeners and that are in all the screener assessments that we have. There's a why it matters, and then kind of ideas on how you might use this tool. And then there's a resource for each of the grade levels, K1 and 2. So let me dig in a little bit deeper with you. So there's many ways that you might use this tool within your context or organization. Obviously, administrators could use this to gather resources, use this with their staff during meetings or professional learning opportunities. Coaches can use it as well for planning and meeting with teachers to review data and thinking about different ways we might respond to the data. Grade level teams can do the same thing in terms of when they're reflecting on the data and wanting to make decisions. And I am sure there's all sorts of other ways people will think about utilizing these resources, which I absolutely love. So let me highlight one for you. We are going to look at a first grade today. And what we have is basically a one-pager. It's a front and back one-pager for each of the elements of the screeners that we have. So there's a one-pager for phonological and phonemic awareness. There's one on knowledge of letter names and sounds. There's one on rapid automatic naming, decoding, fluency, vocabulary, and oral language comprehension. So the thinking is as you're reviewing your data and you say, you know what, we want to know more about how we might strengthen our decoding with our students, you would go to that one pager and you would have all of the resources that they shared earlier with you in basically one location. So I'm going to walk through decoding since that is what was shared with you earlier and you're familiar with that. So it starts with the definition, just what does that mean and what is it that we're trying to achieve? And then it gives you the grade level related grade level standards. Then as you continue into the document, these are the reflective questions that you might consider, and you certainly don't need to answer all of them, but maybe select one or two questions just for your team to talk about or for you to reflect on as you're reviewing the data and thinking about how we might use that to further respond to that information. The next section of the document is exactly what Hallie just walked you through. It is the recommendations from the CDE content blocks for English medium classrooms. And in here, we have kind of listed what all of those best practices are so that you might look at them and reflect like, yeah, we've got this. Hey, maybe we can try this. This is another area we might want to consider thinking about or refining in terms of our practice. And then the final section is what we call deepening your knowledge. And we recognize that we don't know, I always have things to learn, right? So maybe we want to get more information on what those best practices look like. So what we've done is given you a few articles that are related to that topic. There's some podcasts you might listen to. There's some videos, so you can go a little bit deeper on it, maybe see some examples of it. And if we have any additional resources that we felt might help you and support you with implementation, those would be all right there for you. So again, you would pick what is most relevant to you and your team as you're kind of reviewing and reflecting on this information. So the whole goal of this is that we have a go-to resource where we can really think about what might we do for all students, but what else might we do in small group for those students that might need some more targeted and a smaller group setting for the work? And then what might we do for those students that might need some additional time and support or additional interventions? So think about this tool as something that you might use for all. It might be some that you use for tools that you might also use for some of your students. But the goal is that it's all in one place for you. So I'm going to pass it back to Nancy.
Thank you, Molly. Boy, that's such an exciting list of links and resources that I think we all want to dive in and look more deeply. I would like to bring on now Julie Dooley from Contra Costa County Office of Education to share with all of you an exciting project that they have been rolling out for the state. And with that, we'll learn more about intervention, supplemental support, as well as intensified support. So thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to try and advance slides and see how this works. Hello, everybody. I am thrilled to be here today, and the tool that Molly just shared is an incredible resource. I encourage you to unpack that. It is rich with resource. I am here on behalf of Project Arise, and I'm really thrilled that we get to share our professional learning resources. I'm going to share a little bit about how we've got some resources to support some of the content that we're focused on today, and then share with you our more intensive intervention course. So Project Arise is our project name for the Reading Instruction and Intervention Grant Program. It is a grant program funded by CDE, and it is funded through March of 2026. The aim of our grant effort is to provide professional learning resources around reading, instruction, and intervention to K-12 educators across the state. As a collective Project Arise team, we are focused on elevating inclusive and effective literacy instruction for every learner by equipping our educators with free, high-quality professional learning resources that are all grounded in evidence-based practices. 3 county office partners lead this project, Glynn County and San Diego County, with Contra Costa serving as the lead agent. We also have expert content partners who contribute to our professional learning offerings that have included online courses, workshops, literacy networks, and communities of practice. I want to recognize our partners from the Center of Whole Child Education at ASU, TNTP, the National Center on Intensive Intervention, the University of Verne, and finally UCSF Multitudes. All right, the backbone of our project is a series of self-paced online courses that are available, again, to all educators throughout the state. In August, we migrated our courses and resources to the California Educators Together state platform. And I just want to highlight that in the 3 years that our project has been going on, we know that educators throughout the school system have engaged in course learning, and this includes classroom teachers, paraeducators, program specialists, and site and district leaders. Across the 3 years, our content partners have also offered workshops, and those related resources are available alongside our courses in California Educators Together. Finally, we're in the process of finalizing facilitation materials to support instructional leaders with using the courses and the course content as part of their professional development plan. And those resources are also going to be available alongside the courses. While our project is sunsetting at the end of March, our courses, along with our resources, are going to be available through June of 2029. And we are super excited about that 3 years extra that we get to make them available. So with today's content in mind, I want to highlight 3 courses of our 5 that align with our focus. First, there's the Executive Functions and Literacy course, the Foundational Skills course, and the Intensive Intervention course. I do want to add that you can choose to start with any of our courses, any of the courses that are most relevant to you. You do not need to go in a prescribed sequence. There are a couple links there. One will take you to a document that outlines the outcomes for each of the courses, and the other is a guide to accessing our resources on California Educators Together. So let me share just a little bit about those 3 courses. First, our Executive Functions and Literacy course is developed by the Center of Whole Child Education with ASU for Project Arise, and the course takes about 6 hours to complete and is broken down into these 3 modules: Introduction to Executive Functions and Literacy. For Executive Functions and Literacy, Context Matters, and Skill Building for Executive Functions and Literacy. If you are looking for brain-based strategies to build executive functions and really personalize literacy instruction, this might be your best starting point. Our foundational skills course was developed by TNTP, and it takes about 14 hours to complete. It's broken down into 5 different modules, and it starts with really defining what excellent foundational skills instruction is, and then it digs deeper into many of the areas that we learned about earlier: phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics and word recognition, fluency and connected text, and ends with support for developing your foundational skills block. I want to highlight that our team from San Diego worked with TNTP to embed best practices for multilingual learners into the content of this course, embedded right at the point of learning, and that's done in this course along with our comprehension course. So when we are thinking about students who might need some additional support with developing these skills, we get requests quite often from our middle and high school educators. We typically point them in the direction of this course. And this might be a good starting point for you as well. So our intensive intervention course was developed by the National Center on Intensive Intervention, or NCII. At about an hour and a half to complete, it is our shortest course. But length doesn't matter because this one packs a punch. There are 3 modules in this course: intensive intervention, 5 steps of the data-based individualization process, or DBI for short, and the taxonomy of intervention intensity. So if you have students who are not responding to Tier 2 interventions and you're looking for a new approach, this is the course where you should start. And my goal is to really pique your interest in this approach because I believe it has the potential to impact how we support our students with really the most intensive needs. So before I dive into defining DBI, I want to show you where it kind of fits within a multi-tiered system of support. DBI is really a system level support that provides a process to follow when students aren't responding to their Tier 2 intervention. It's some students, right? And it's an approach for moving students along a continuum from a Tier 2 support to a more intensive support. So it's really in that sum and few as students move between those 2 tiers. So here's a definition of data-based individualization, or DBI. It's an ongoing research-based process for intensifying interventions for students with severe and persistent learning and behavioral needs. So it's for our students with those most intensive needs. And I want to point out that's both learning and behavioral needs. It's a system that relies on data to determine how and when to provide the most intensive intervention. So again, I'm going to kind of point out that this process is available to meet both learning and behavioral needs. It's an approach that can be followed for reading, for math, and behavior. The course, along with the other DBI resources that we're sharing, provide examples and resources on how you could support all 3. I get really excited about this because can you imagine how incredibly powerful it would be if a school system could follow just one process to intensify supports and services no matter the persistent needs of the student, whether that's reading, math, or behavior. So now what I'd like to do is briefly introduce you to the 5 steps. And remember, my hope is to pique your curiosity enough to make you want to go learn more. All right, step 1 is laying the foundation for DBI. The process starts with students receiving a validated intervention program. And NCII uses the following criteria to define what a validated intervention program is. So it's standardized and it's evidence-based, both programs or instructional practice. So some familiar examples might include SIPs for a program or an instructional practice recommended in one of our IES guides. It provides targeted and matched to student needs. It addresses specific skills. And then finally, it's delivered with fidelity. So I've provided a link to a resource called 10 Essential Features of Tier 2 Supplemental Intervention. And I encourage you to check this one out if you have questions about your interventions. All right, so step 2 centers on assessing our impact, and it relies on a progress monitoring plan. This plan should include a valid and reliable progress monitoring tool, and many of our universal screeners have these built right into their assessment suites. The plan includes an ambitious yet attainable goal and decision rules that help evaluate students' responsiveness to the intervention. At this step, if a student is responding to their intervention, then the intervention and the progress monitoring continue. It's when a student is unresponsive to the intervention that it becomes a little unclear about what to do next, especially if a student has not made significant growth across multiple cycles of intervention. And in our work that we're doing with many of our district partners, this is where people are getting stuck. It's this scenario that kind of moves us in to the next step, or step 3. Step 3 centers on developing a hypothesis about why a student is not responding to the intervention that they're receiving. You're going to use informal diagnostic data, you're going to collect it, and you're going to use it to help you develop and refine a hypothesis. So let's take just a little mini detour to explore what NCII means by informal diagnostic data. First, it's really important that we ground ourselves in why a student might be experiencing challenges. We know with the right balance between the individual learner's needs and the curriculum and the instruction and the classroom environment, a student will thrive. So we need to look beyond the learner to better understand how the curriculum, the instruction, and or the classroom environment may be creating barriers to the learning. So how do we go about gathering and collecting more data? Well, NCII uses the acronym RIOT to outline 4 different options. So reviewing artifacts of instruction like lesson plans or the curriculum like a scope and a sequence can help provide insights as to whether or not that intervention is a match or not. You can interview the students or the teacher, and this would lead to a deeper understanding of the learner's experience. You can go and observe the learner in their context, maybe particularly the challenging part of their day or their challenging part of their learning. And this would identify opportunities to adjust based on the barriers you may have observed. And finally, test. Well, this is the type of data we predominantly gather: assessment results and test scores. So, there was this really incredible tool that was on a slide that is not there, but I'm just going to point it out. I saw the link go into chat. And so I would love for you to open that up and just take a sneak peek at it. It's called the Riot ISO Matrix. And what it does is it gives you a clue about where you might start to gather more information to help you better understand and develop your hypothesis. And there it went back in. Thank you, Bonnie, for putting that back in. This tool kind of overlays what type of information that can be collected, and that kind of runs across the top of the columns. And then how that data can be collected runs along the rows. And I've just lost this. There we go. Thank you, Nancy. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. And move. All right, so across the top, you have instruction, environment, curriculum, and the learner. And down the side, you have review, interview, observe, and test. So let's say you have a initial hypothesis around instruction. So what you can do is go along to that instruction column and glance down that column to get ideas about what data you might want to gather to help you better understand the student's needs. For me, the key takeaway in this is how it broadened my understanding of all the other ways I can better understand the learner. If you're looking at this matrix, down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's an overlap between the learner and the test. And that is where I think we spend most of our time. We lean heavily on outcome data rather than the other variables that might be impacting the learner. So thank you for finding our way through that riot ISOL. It is really a great tool, and I hope you had an opportunity to take a deeper look. All right, so making a change. Step 4 is deciding what change to make to the intervention that addresses the hypothesis that you kind of settled on. How can we best adapt and individualize the intervention to address the hypothesis that you developed in step 3? Now, NCII has a lot of great resources to support this step. You're going to identify your adaptation, and then you're going to implement it. Now, many of us default to adapting the dosage of an intervention. That means you're increasing the amount of time or the frequency of the intervention, or maybe you're trying to decrease the group size. These adaptations can be really taxing on a system, and are not always feasible given our time and resource. There are some tools from NCII that provide intensification strategies that sit outside of dosage. So I'd encourage you to take a look at those different resources and thinking about other ways to adapt your intervention. Finally, step 5 focuses again on progress monitoring and reevaluating our impact. We are going to monitor their response to the adaptation by collecting at least 4 to 6 data points. And again, you're going to progress monitor, and if a student is responding to this adaptation, you're going to continue the adaptation. If they are not, you're going to kind of cycle back up there to the diagnostic data and continue to collect data and refine your hypothesis or reevaluate your hypothesis. I hope that you're a little more curious about learning more about DBI, and I encourage you to take our intensive intervention course or explore NCII's DBI resources. Finally, I just want to remind you that all of our resources, our courses, our professional learning resources are all free to educators across the state. I invite you to learn more about what we have to offer. I encourage you to open our flyer, learn how to register for our courses and our resources. And then we do have 3 more months of workshops. Check them out. There might be something of interest. So thank you for allowing me to share what Project Arise has to offer.
Thank you, Julie. I think we're all just struck by the wealth of information in this project. So we're just so pleased that you shared. And with that, we're going to turn to our panel discussion. If you have questions that you would like our panel to answer, I have some questions that I want to ask them. And so I'm going to ask them all to come back into the session and come off mute so that we can, and I will stop sharing so that we can concentrate on their faces. All right. Well, you 3 are the triumvirate today, really providing wonderful information. I am adding to your long list of resources for intervention by also sharing with you something from the What Works Clearinghouse for grades 4 through 9. Okay, so questions for you. I always am struck by MTSS, universal support, or if you will, tier 1, and supplemental support, and what is really the difference? Because aren't we always trying to adjust to children's progress in the moment? And I'd like each of you to just take a crack at that. And if you want to talk about maybe grouping as a part of it, that would be terrific. So I'm going to pick on Hallie and ask her to come off mute and share your thoughts.
Well, I thank you. I think that's a good question. And I will be short and succinct and say, of course, we're paying attention to students and how they're responding. Of course we are. And so in the moment I adjust, I go back, I see how my whole group is doing, but I also recognize that these 3 kids weren't really quite seeming to get what was going on. And so I may pull them over into a small group to reiterate the instruction, to provide it a slightly different approach to it. But yes, I'm doing a lot of the very kinds of things that we would see in supplemental, but I'll let Molly answer how that might be different. But yes, I'm responding. Yes, I'm pivoting. Yes, I'm offering additional in the moment or planning for the next day to do it.
Yeah, so I think you hit at the critical question, because we always think of small group, and I think that's where it gets maybe a little blurry or confusing, because obviously we want to do small group, right? With we'll use the language of tier 1 or universal opportunities based on data, and then we also might want to think about doing some additional small group with some students based on the data and based on their specific needs. So for me, I always think about it as the universal or the tier 1 is what we are all working on, and it's related to that. So it's an additional, maybe a pre-teach, a reteach, additional practice, additional opportunity, a smaller group just to reinforce or to gather, give more corrective feedback, or really just to monitor students. And that's really kind of what we're doing in tier 1. It's very fluid and on demand based on how we're seeing students responding in our instruction for all of our students. For me, the additional or the sum or, the supplemental is I'm noticing like I did that and I might have a few that need a little bit more. And it's not just, it might be an extension. Like I need to, do that as well. It doesn't always have to be that they didn't master something, but just what's a little bit more that they might need. So that would be for some, and it may be that week's particular goals and objectives, but it could also be some related skills that are going to support and help them achieve that. So that's kind of how I think about it. You want to add to that, Julie?
I don't know what more to add to that because I really think that you've kind of nailed it. I would say that in every effort, you're trying to keep your kids close to your core program, right? And their grade level standards. So if you're always trying to monitor that and adjust what you do to support them and aligning with that, then I think you're doing the very best that you can to meet your needs. And I think I kind of almost think of tier 2 is like a gradation, right? There's going to be some kids that are super close, but the amount of support that they need is a little greater. And then you're going to have kids, for one reason or another, that gap is kind of extended, but you're still working to keep them closer to the core, right? And then your intensive kids is really those with those most persistent needs that you really need to individualize and do something different, right? So I don't think I added much to that. But I think to your point, Holly, you're always adjusting and pivoting. You should always be monitoring and checking for understanding, using your formative checking, right? To adapt your instruction.
And if I may add, I love your language of gradation because that's really, or it's a continuum, right? It's not one or the other. We only get this, or we only get this, or we only get this. It's really all. And that we're always thinking about what are we doing very intentionally based on the data, use of best practices, but then we're saying, oh, that didn't work here. What might we do, right? And that's still not working. Okay, now what might we do? And it's that continual quest to ensure every child masters that.
And if I can add, this is why teaching is so important. And this is why we need exceptional people who continue to take professional learning like a lot of you are, I'm sure. And teaching is dynamic. It's not, I'm just following the lesson plan I had. It's a dynamic process. Anyway, it's so fun. I love it.
Thank you for all those thoughtful ideas. And I'm going to pick on Molly now because when we were chatting yesterday, you had this range of examples of different ways to group students. Could you just share that with everyone here?
I would love to. So I work with just so many amazing districts that have really been tackling this question, right? So we've been working really, really hard on bringing those evidence-based practices that you list in the content blocks, right, into live and in live with students. But then we also have been looking at what can we do with small group, and what about those students that might need a little bit more or something different. It's not always more, sometimes it's just different, or a different approach or more practice. So we really had to find time to do this. I think the critical element here is that we have a dedicated time. So for me, that tier 2 or supplemental, that we really need a system that says this is when we're doing it, because otherwise it makes it really hard. So our schools have been trying a lot of different things. So one of the common one is what they call win time, what I need time. And it allows the teachers to work with different targeted groups based on data. And some are doing it within their own classroom. Some have even looked at moving a few students, not a massive move, but maybe I have, 2 students in my class that might need one specific thing, and one teacher kind of works with that. So that's one thing that we've tried. They've also have really been trying another school I was actually just at this week. It's called AHOD time, all hands on deck. And they do that in the win time models as well. But every single available resource on campus is used during that time to do even more targeted small groups. But it really requires, as Julie said, a system, right? And a master schedule. But they bring in every teacher's working on it. They bring all the paraeducators, any support staff that is credentialed to do this work. So they bring everybody, and then they can target and get into some smaller groups. That really requires, and then they set up whole systems of time to look at data. So they administer screener data. They have dedicated days to look at the data, determine what the needs and the priorities are. They organize students. They determine who is the best person to teach that particular thing or element. And then they progress monitor and are continuing adjusting every few weeks. It's an amazing system that they've been using and getting great results. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Molly. We have a few questions in the chat that came in on the Q&A. So Julie, take a look at those and see what you think. And I want to reiterate a point that all 3 of you have made, and that is the system needs to be organized in such a way that the opportunities for grouping and for use of specialized professionals, paraprofessionals, can be optimized. And so none of this happens by one teacher all by herself or himself in a classroom, but the entire school working together in a team. So with that, Julie, can you tackle a couple of these questions?
I'll take the first one there. Can people outside the state take these courses? I'm going to say it's been known to happen. It's in California Educators Together. There is nothing that filters out people that you just need your email address. So there's nothing that filters out people from out of state. We've had people from out of state attend our courses or engage in our courses and attend our workshops. Why should we filter or limit the opportunity? Let's make sure everybody that wants it can engage in it. So feel free is what I would say. And then are there are there dates recommended for progress monitoring? I've seen different programs recommend different dates. And my initial response, I'm going to call my colleagues to add to this, is that typically it'll be recommended within whatever progress monitoring tools that you're using and the program that you're using, right? And then there is guidance around that. I am going to say in our DBI course, our intensive intervention course, we have workshop videos that have been done by Dr. John Potter from NCII. And there are two specifically on progress monitoring practices that if you're curious to learn more about that, I would turn to those webinars for some more information.
Thank you, Julie. And I'm going to tackle this last question about advice regarding leaders who are quick to quote unquote send children to tier 2 or supplemental support when perhaps it's really the first instruction where the support could best be provided. And my response to that is it's a system. It's hard if the school leader isn't looking at the full picture, but you really want to have a leadership team for literacy in a school and in a district, and perhaps taking a look at some of the materials. The chart that we went away from the PowerPoint and displayed might be a very good opportunity to think about further diagnosis, and that does get at the notion of what's happening in terms of the instruction that can be supporting the students. So it's a culture shift, and culture shifts are hard to create, but you want to come together as a team, as a group to do that. And perhaps there's support from coaches in your site or at your district or others who might be able to introduce some of those concepts. With that, we're just about out of time. I'll do a real quick round robin with our three presenters and ask Bonnie to come back on as we close out for final words. Hallie, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, gosh. We are all in this together, and we all have the same end goal, and that's to help all children in this state achieve. So call on your colleagues, use your colleagues, continue to grow yourselves. It's a beautiful thing to be part of this rich collaborative process where we're all steering the ship in the same direction, and that's for the benefit of individuals and what their personal goals and their family goals are too. So thanks for being here again.
Thank you. Molly?
Yeah, we can do this. That's what I want to say. I'm so blessed. I get to see so many people that are making it happen for students. And they're just following the data, and all they're doing is constantly asking the question, who's it working for? What else might we need to do? And if we keep looking at the data and following the data and keep questioning ourselves and saying, what is possible? The results are phenomenal. And it's so important because
Thank you,
without
Molly.
these foundational literacy skills, it's hard. Thank you
And
for being here.
Julie?
I would just say, one, thank you for being here. You've dedicated yourself to continuing to hone your craft and learn. I feel like there's so much happening around literacy in our state, and it's absolutely wonderful and a long time coming. And I say, let's seize this opportunity. Seize the opportunity to utilize all these new tools. And, as much as the RDRS has kind of shifted our systems a little bit, I would say let's embrace it as an opportunity to really reevaluate our systems and really to think about how we're learning about what we know about kids and using that information to really guide our instruction.
Thank you, Julie. And I'll turn to Bonnie because she's probably been sitting there thinking, I want to say this and that. Final thoughts, Bonnie, and I'm going to share one last slide that you can all look at as she's speaking.
I just want to thank Molly, Julie, Hallie for being on and sharing such important information, especially in light of the screener, the literacy roadmap, the upcoming PD, the upcoming instructional materials. We've made gains in California, 1.8 percentage points between 24 and 25, the most gains we've made in years. We have to keep up that momentum, but not just keep it up. We need to accelerate it so we don't take 2 decades to get 80 to 90% of our students reading or by meeting or exceeding our standards. So appreciate everyone being on here to support this momentum and helping our students read by 3rd grade. I also want to put in a plug in for this next upcoming webinar on the 29th. We will have Dr. Julie Washington, and we will also have Dr. Tracy Whedon on to impart their knowledge on strategies to support equitable practice in literacy, supporting a commitment that California has to Black student success. Thank you.
With that, we want to wish you a good evening, and you can contact us if you have further questions. Again, thank you, Bonnie, everyone who supported this webinar, Julie, Molly, and Hallie. Good night, all.